Now, we know that the impeachment process, it starts with an inquiry. It then moves to formal charges. The charges then go to the Senate, and you need 60 votes to convict or remove a president for high crimes. The reality is that the Democrats are now where the Republicans were when it was all about Trump, which is there's not 60 votes in the Senate, so no one is removing Joe Biden.
That's right.
Whether it ever gets to that trial or not, well, again, that has to be a significant vote in the House. Now, they do have a majority, but not a big majority, so no one knows where that process goes. But the need to inquire into the behaviour of Joe Biden, to get to his bank records, to see whether the claims of Hunter Biden's multiple business partners who say a cut of the money that clearly was being paid, not for energy expertise in Ukraine, but it was obviously access money that was going, to Hunter Biden because of the proximity to Joe, but also the suggestion of the business partners was that a section of that money was going to Joe Biden first as the vice president and then, of course, as a private citizen getting ready to run again for the presidency. Do you believe that a more public impeachment inquiry gets us closer to evidence about where the money moved? Because Biden firstly said, I knew nothing about all of this. Well, that clearly wasn't true. But he's always stood by, show me the money. Is this the part of the investigation that gets us to the money?
Well, look, I think it is. This impeachment inquiry will have subpoena powers. They can call witnesses. Obviously, the committee will be a lot more focused on this one question of the Biden family dealings. And I think it's perfectly justified to convene the committee. I mean, of course, we've known about the suspicion of corruption in relation to Ukraine for some time. Then, of course, we had Hunter Biden's laptop and all the emails about 10% for the big guy. So there's been a lot of smoke there. But this year, Congress has uncovered even more things. There's the more than 140 suspicious bank transaction reports by the US Treasury. I mean, that's quite extraordinary. And they're transactions that the Biden family are engaged in. And of course, you mentioned earlier that Biden lied. I think that is the big one. I mean, as you know, he's been saying publicly over and over that he knew nothing about his son's business dealings. He never even talked about them. Well, that's been definitively shown now through clear evidence, through the testimony from Hunter's former colleagues, that the vice president then and the president now was lying. And so, now that we know he was lying about that, I mean, he could be lying about a lot of things. So look, I think it's justified to focus. To have a focused inquiry on this question. But it is ultimately a political test. And it's interesting that the Speaker did not have a vote to set up this inquiry, which suggests that he thought that it might actually fail, that some Republicans would side with Democrats in the House and they wouldn't. So he's brought the committee about, as I understand it, through procedural reasons, through methods, I should say. But look, I think it's going to be very interesting. But I mean, for the Democrats, it's bad. I mean, he's going to have the pall of impeachment hanging over him as he campaigns for re-election kind of in the next 6 months, even if the committee ultimately decides not to impeach.
The absurdity of recent politics is that we know that the impeachment of the impeachment process around Bill Clinton was because he clearly lied under oath as president. Again, there were never enough votes to move that to him, but to be removed. The closest that had ever happened was Richard Nixon, and that was because there were the votes to impeach him about his role in the Watergate robbery, and that's why he ended up resigning. So knowing what the final outcome's going to be means a lot of people are able to turn around and say, nothing to see here. Now, in the same way that Republicans said that particularly the Ukrainian impeachment was unnecessary because Zelensky himself said that he felt no pressure, did not believe it was quid pro quo, but that didn't matter. They still went on the process anyway. But isn't really the template for the Rorschach test here for the media about just how uninquiring their mind is back to Russia collusion? Remember when MSNBC was bombshell a day and the walls are closing in, and ultimately that process did not prove what they alleged. So what I'm going to find really interesting here is while the preponderance of power and media is going to now be on the Democrat side to say, oh, the threshold is too low and this is all just overtly political, the reality is this is no different than the first impeachment that they tried on Trump.
Well, yeah, I mean, and certainly I'd argue that the evidence is far greater than the evidence for Trump. And, if you go back to Clinton, as you just mentioned, I mean, sure, it was a bad thing that he lied, but, he didn't really hurt anyone or take money. I mean, I would argue morally it was a far lesser crime than this vast, sprawling Biden family enterprise, where there's hundreds of shell companies receiving $20 million from various foreign companies. I mean, that is far worse behaviour than Bill Clinton, who lied about a sexual relationship. I mean, really, who cares? And I think it's got a testament to how we've changed as a society, that we're far more willing to accept what Biden's done. At least the US media is far more willing to accept than what happened in the 1990s. So look, I think there's plenty of evidence there for this trial. I mean, I think the Trump impeachment, the first one at least, I think the second one was probably justified, but the first one over the phone call really was just pure politics. And if you're really cynical, I mean, I think you could say that Democrats were terrified of the line that Trump was taking, which was to ask Ukraine about the Biden family relationship there with the gas company Burisma. So I mean, he may have been onto something, and it's certainly going to come back to bite them through this inquiry.
Well, again, I always just try to simplify things for how normal people would understand, not because they're dumb, but because they're busy. And the reality here is that business partners of Hunter Biden say that there was a clear train of money from Hunter back to Joe. Remember, Joe was also, among other things, charging his son, a couple of $100,000 rent, apparently, to live in the family home. There is plenty there. But what's going to be the test here is whether, when Tony Bobulinski, the former business partner, gives evidence, which presumably he will, whether the media runs 10 seconds of it, or whether they actually do the lead stories that they did when it was all about Russia collusion.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. The New York Times just today, I mean, it's meant to be a news piece about the impeachment inquiry, but they're almost defending the president, saying that there's no evidence of any wrongdoing. I mean, I find it quite laughable, really. I mean, it's it is testament to how the media has changed over time, and sadly in this country, I think about 70-80% of the mainstream media is extremely pro-Democrat. I mean, it's not really neutral anymore, and they've been trying to ignore this story for as long as possible. But it's worth pointing out that the American people already think that there was wrongdoing. So quite aside from whatever the inquiry finds, a CNN poll last week found 63% of Americans, they believe that Joe Biden was involved with Hunter Biden's business dealings. Now, whether that's true or not, that is very damaging politically.
Good stuff, Adam. Always great to talk to you. What a big day. We'll read your ongoing coverage in the paper and online at theaustralian.com.au. Thank you, mate.
Thanks, Paul.